You're listening to Podcasting for Experts, with honest conversations about using podcasting as a tool to grow your reach, increase your audience, make a positive impact on the world, and most importantly, to get paid for your efforts. I'm your host, Jess, and we are Pristine Podcasts. Let's talk podcasting. Hey, and welcome to episode 1. In this episode, we're going to start right at the beginning, around about the time where you might first be thinking, hey, I could start a podcast, couldn't I? When that thought first comes up, the response can vary hugely from person to person. Some people want to just get started immediately and just see if it works out, and that's totally me. And others end up thinking about whether it's a good idea for weeks or even months on end. As you can guess, neither one of those two approaches is really actually the best path to take. Podcasting really is a solid way for you to grow your audience and reach new people, become known, become an expert in your niche. And by the way, I would always say niche. But it's also not the right thing for everyone. And definitely it is not a get-rich-quick thing. I don't actually know a get-rich-quick thing. Otherwise, I'd be rich already. So today, I want to run through some of the reasons why podcasting might or might not work for you so that you can take a few days to think about it before you make the final decision or take any action. Podcasting can be a great marketing method to use to position yourself as an expert, to reach more people, to get more clients, but only if you actually use it intentionally and at least at times consistently. And I'm saying that because consistency is probably one of the hardest things for me just because of how my brain works. And there are some ways to mitigate that somewhat with podcasting, but you really need to be aware of yourself and where you may get caught up to be able, to put some systems in place to catch you. So before we dive into the list of why and why not podcasting could work for you, I just want to explain one concept that helped me years ago to streamline my marketing efforts, and that is the concept of the one central piece of content. So that means that out of all the potential marketing methods out there, you are picking one to focus the majority of your efforts on, and all other platforms out there where you have an account, they are only getting a repurposed version of that main piece of content. So in this podcast, I will assume that you understand that your efforts, or more appropriately, your fucks that you have to give, are limited. And once they've run out, you will not produce anything new or refreshing. It will just feel like a chore that you have to get done. And I will probably dedicate a whole episode to this later on when it comes to promoting your show, because it's such an important thing to conserve your energy. But for now, I just hope that you get this idea of the one central piece of content. So when I'm talking about doing a podcast, I really mean focusing like 80% of your effort on the podcast and 20% on everything else. So is podcasting as your one central piece of content the right thing for you? So the first point that I want to talk about is having a message or having knowledge or expertise that you want to share. For you to show up and talk about the same kind of topic every single week, you better have something to talk about. So if after 10 episodes, you feel that you've kind of said all that you needed to say, then honestly, you could record a free audio series instead and have that as an opt-in on your website and not bother with the whole process of setting up a podcast. So I recommend having a lot of ideas on what you can talk about backlogged before you even start. And that's something we'll talk more about in the upcoming episode. Thing number 2 to consider is, does your content rely on video to get your message across? So if you're talking about something very visual, like let's say you have a design podcast, then doing a podcast that explains very technical concepts is probably not a very good idea, because you have no way of saying and then you have a shape like this or a font like that, and then you do that, it wouldn't work. You wouldn't be able to get your point across. But if the aim of your show is to be interviewing other designers or talking about industry developments, then it could be perfect for you. So be careful with what you think you can talk about and consider whether you would be better off using video as a medium or whether audio is the better way to deliver that content. Thing number 3 that really needs to be the case is that you are way better at speaking than you are at writing. So you are maybe the kind of person that always sends voice notes, that gives presentations and trainings, and it feels like the words just kind of fly out of your mouth with, hardly any preparation. But when you need to sit down and you have to write a blog article for your website or maybe answer some written interview questions, you just don't know what to say. So when you're in that boat, you might find that the podcast is a perfect medium for you because you're not required to spend long amounts of time writing. Yes, you do need to research. Yes, you do need to have some sort of note set up, but it doesn't have to be a full script that you've actually written out. Like, I work off of a mix of parts that I've scripted fully, parts where I've just taken notes, and then other things that I add onto it. So if you overall have the feeling that speaking is easier for you than writing, then definitely consider podcasting. Thing number 4 to consider is whether you're actually able to fill solo episodes with content and make them interesting. So your biggest struggle here is going to be making sure that you're able to clearly get your message across from start to finish without going off on too many tangents. And that's something that I often struggle with because I can think of a lot of examples that apply and I really want to illustrate them. So for me, it's easy to get lost in a side note. So you need to be able to balance having examples and giving examples with knowing how much you really need to share for the person to understand and take something valuable from your example to apply to their situation. So for example, if you have a relationship podcast, you could use examples from your practice to highlight how a particular concept usually plays out in real life. Or you could even share a story from your own life when you were in that situation, but try and keep the details only down to what is really relevant to the listener. If you go too far off track when you usually tell stories, your audience is likely going to start drifting off and they may stop listening entirely because they can't actually remember what you actually talked about. Factor number 5 to consider is whether or not you're actually willing to develop your speaking skills. So I found that everything in life is a skill that needs to be learned. Like, somebody gave me this orchid plant and I have a habit of killing orchid plants. So I committed myself to not killing this one and to learning whatever it takes to keep this plant alive. And now, I don't know, 8 weeks later, I can say it's still got flowers on it, which is a complete miracle as far as I'm concerned. The same goes for podcasting. So you might know some things about teaching or speaking, but you might find that you don't have the technical knowledge that it takes. So commit to learning about it. You might find that speaking is easy to you, but you still feel like you could be doing a lot better. So commit to practicing. There's also always ways in which you can kind of mitigate any difficulties that you might have with speaking. So if you find that you get lost in thought a lot or that you use a lot of filler words, then you can also try writing a more long-form script at the start to reduce the amount of times that you lose your place. Practice makes perfect, but it really does take the time and the commitment to podcasting before you can get enough of the practice in. Thing number 6 that you want to consider is that, do you actually love talking to new people and collaborating? And that's more for you if you're intending to have an interview style podcast, but it really goes without saying that you need to actually love getting to know new people at a deeper level. Interviews may seem easy on the surface, but a lot of preparation goes into a good interview, and interviewing itself is a completely separate skill to learn. I personally don't feel that I am very strong in this area yet because I haven't done it too much. So for me, this will also be a skill that I will get to develop more later on in this journey of this podcast. So we're all always on a journey to getting better at something. And you know what? I'm fine. I'm fine with the first 3 interviews that I'm doing maybe being not that good. That's fine. You know, with every interview that I do, with every time that I try to do better, I will get better. So now that we've covered the signs that podcasting might be for you, what are some of the signs that podcasting may not be the best method for you to market yourself or your business? I'll tell you all about it just after a tiny break. Hey, can I interrupt the episode for just a hot second or two? I just really quickly wanted to tell you that if you've been putting off launching your podcast because you're confused about the process and just don't know where to start, there is still hope. We put together a full toolkit that gives you everything that you need to start your podcast in the next few weeks, including a 90-some page step-by-step guide taking you from absolutely no clue what I'm doing to that was easier than I thought. A podcast concept worksheet helping you to define all of the most important details of your show, such as your why, your audience, the transformation you're offering, etc. A podcast summary sheet where you can make note of all of those important details that you need for your show. The podcast episode master spreadsheet, and this is where you will link out all of your episode ideas, number them, link to your published episode, link to your show notes, add your player embed codes, and everything else that you need to stay efficient and organized every single week. It also includes the podcast episode outline guide, so you always know how to structure your episodes to get the most out of them, as well as a set of Canva templates that you can use to quickly design your podcast episode cover, even if you have no clue how to even design something. You will also get the guest interview guide telling you exactly what you need in place to interview a guest successfully, and you will receive a set of podcaster affirmations that will help you to feel motivated and confident on your new podcasting journey. And you will get all of this for just $27. So if you're interested in checking it out, then head over to pristinepodcast.com/toolkit. And with that, we'll go right back to the episode. Now I want to continue with some signs that podcasting might not be the right thing for you. Factor number 1 would be that you freeze up as soon as you hit record. And this one comes with a little bit of a caveat. This is somewhat normal to happen at the start. Like when you're writing a blog post, you often end up with this blank page syndrome where you stare at the empty page and you're unsure what to say, you type 3 words, you delete it again. And the same thing can happen when you hit record the first few times. But if you find that you're on episode 10, 15, 20, and you still just can't get into the flow and you keep thinking that, writing a blog post or showing up on social media would just be so much easier, then podcasting is probably just not right for you. Thing number 2 to consider is if you regularly struggle to formulate your thoughts and tell a cohesive story. I mentioned earlier already that somehow, somewhat, you can mitigate this by almost fully scripting a solo podcast. But if you're planning to do interviews and you find yourself getting very distracted when the other person speaks and you can't pay attention to them and think of what you're going to say next, then try not to do the interviews and focus on practicing that skill, doing the podcast solo. And if all of that takes too long and you literally find that you need to write out the whole thing, then it could be that you're just better off not forcing the podcast. It is okay to do whatever feels easiest to you. You don't have to be doing all the things that everyone else is doing. Thing number 3 to consider is your time. If you feel that you don't really have the time that it takes to do all of the things associated with the podcast and you don't have anyone else to support you, then you may want to reconsider. People often think that it's quite simple to make a podcast, and yeah, it generally is, but you do need to invest the time that it takes into it, and some people just don't have that time available. I'm not going to sugarcoat it because I see too many people end up completely overwhelmed, but you need to plan in time for researching and taking notes, or even writing a full script if that's easier for you. So that could take anything from 1 hour to 5 hours for an episode. It really depends on your topic and how much you know about it. Then you need to record the episode. And again, it depends on your skill level, how much time it takes you to record a 20-minute episode. You also have to factor in tech challenges. So I'll give you an example. I have something on my laptop that is using up a lot of the CPU. And while I'm recording right now, every once in a while, it will drop out my recording. And I have no way of stopping it right now and no way to prevent it from happening. So these things happen, and it might mean that you end up recording an episode once, twice, or even 3 times. Once you're done with recording, you have to edit this whole thing, and you might find that you spend, with a good episode, 3 times the length of the episode, but with a guest that is very challenging to edit, you might spend as much as 10 times the length of the episode editing it. So that takes time as well. Then you need to publish the episodes, you need to write the show notes, you might need to run the transcript and then edit it, whatever you choose to do after publishing. And then comes the most important part. So by that point that you are pretty fed up with dealing with this episode, you then have to go out to promote it on social media and to your email list, and you have to get people to listen. So if you're doing interviews, you have additional steps on top of those ones, because now you need to research new guests that would be perfect for your show. You have to contact them, book them in, send them all the information. Then you have to research them in depth. So you might need to consume some of their stuff, prepare questions. Then when you're recording it, you have to spend some extra time on the recording to make sure that your guest's audio sounds good, to make sure that your audio sounds good. So overall, you really need to make sure that you don't underestimate the effort it takes to produce the show. So it's better to put out a good quality episode twice a month than just deliver something really, really rushed every single week. And if you feel like you just don't have the time or the fucks to give to this process, then again, writing blog posts or focusing on building your email list, doing quick live trainings on Facebook, for example, may be way better methods for you to position yourself. Thing number 3 to consider is not feeling like you have enough ideas or naturally getting bored very easily. So if you're the kind of person that can do things for like a 6-week burst and then gets bored with it, podcasting might not be the right thing for you, because once the novelty is worn off, it is really just doing the same thing every single week. And then you might find that the workload kind of outweighs any positive that you're feeling from it. And it would probably be easier for you to use other methods. Again, I'm the kind of person that tends to do things in bursts, so I would rather do one activity for 10 hours than doing the activity 10 weeks in a row for 1 hour. I kind of find that annoying. So I focus on doing the podcast in seasons because it works better with how I work. But I don't mind to return to that same topic and that same activity 6 weeks later to record another 6 episodes, and then 6 weeks later to record another 6 episodes, if that makes sense. So you really have to get to know yourself and just consider what feels easy to you, what feels light, and what feels difficult, heavy, and icky. Another reason for why podcasting might not be for you right now is that you need to make money in your business quick. Nothing in life is a quick fix, and podcasting especially isn't. If you need money, you're better off to just go out there and hustle for high-end one-to-one clients by directly interacting with your ideal customer, or going out to temporarily get a job, but don't turn to podcasting as a short-term quick fix for your money challenges, because podcasting is really something where you are playing the long game. If you don't really have an audience right now, it could be months before you get enough downloads that you're even thinking anyone cares about your show. And that's perfectly normal and perfectly okay. Yes, there are people who strike gold immediately because there was kind of a gap in the market that people were desperate to have someone fill. But these things, they're like rare unicorns. If you're a designer, a copywriter, a fiction author, there's lots of other people out there like you already doing this, and you need to slowly carve out your place. You have a different approach, a different perspective that is unique, but it takes time for you to be able to reach the right people. And that's why podcasting is potentially not, anything that's going to get you results really quickly. It's more like the steady drop. Reason number 5 is that your audience is currently not listening to podcasts. So if you're still kind of new in the business world and you don't have much of an audience right now, and those people, they're not really into podcasts at the moment, and you have a limited time available, then honestly, communicating with your audience more directly, for example, by going live on Facebook, may get you a better result in the short term. Once your audience has grown, it becomes a little bit easier to shift them to another platform such as a podcast. But you just have to remember that if you have an audience of 10,000, maybe only 3,000 of those people are going to follow you to your podcast. So if you only have an audience of 300, you'd be lucky if you could convince 100 people to listen to your show. So if you're hustling for clients right now, then you may just have better results or faster results in that sense if you're just interacting with people on platforms where they're already at anyways. Alrighty, so those were my main pointers as to who should really consider podcasting as a medium to market themselves or their business, and who might better benefit from using other methods. If you think that it's just not for you, I just want you to know that that's okay. Like, there is no magic pill. This is simply one of the many, many, many tools that you have at your disposal to spread your message, reach more people, and have a bigger impact. But if podcasting is not for you, then there's others out there that will work just as well. And actually, they will work even better for you because you love them, you enjoy doing them, and we always do better when we follow the fun. If you enjoyed this episode, our entire team would appreciate if you take a minute to leave us a review. And if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, or if you would like to talk about collaborations, then please drop us an email. You'll find our email address in the show notes, which will always be at pristinepodcast.com/podcast. As always, I hope you have an amazing day, and we will see you for the next one. And that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you. If you're ready to finally pull the trigger and get started with your podcast, then don't forget to check out the podcast launch toolkit at pristinepodcast.com/toolkit. The link is also in the show notes.